Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here today. I am Command Sgt. Major John Wayne Troxell. I am the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And this is the Defense Senior Enlisted Leader Council Symposium Press Conference. The DSELC, as we call the acronym, comprises of myself, the Service Senior Enlisted Advisors, the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, and the Command Senior Enlisted Leaders of the Combatant Commands and Sub-Unified Commands. This symposium is an annual event that brings the DSELC together to address enlisted items impacting the joint force and families. With me in this first press conference, from my right, is the current Sergeant Major of Marine Corps Manpower and Reserve Affairs, but on Friday night he will be the next Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, Sergeant Major Troy Black. Next to me on my right is the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, Jason Vanderhayden. To my immediate left is the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Kay Wright. To his left is the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, Russ Smith. And on the far left, 51% of the force being Guard, is the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, Command Sergeant Major Chris Kepner. The second press conference will include the Combatant Command Senior Enlisted Leaders minus CENTCOM and AFRICOM, and we will include U.S. Forces Afghanistan Senior Enlisted Leader in there. In this first press conference, I and the Service Senior Enlisted will focus on service-specific and joint issues that affect the manning, organizing, equipping, and training of the force, as well as service member and family programs. The second press conference will focus on the performance of the troops in the operational environment. I'll provide a brief statement, and then we can commence with the Q&A. So today's operating environment may be the most dynamic it's ever been in the history of the United States military. Today, our nation faces security challenges that are trans-regional and includes all domains of warfighting. Today's military has to not only be ready to fight and win on any given day, but also has to be able to respond to threats, deter strategic and conventional attack, assure allies and partners, and compete below the level of armed conflict with a military dimension. Add in that, on any given day, the United States military is operating in the air, ground, and maritime domains of around 170 countries and includes over 250,000 troops in various phases of operations. It's clear that this is a very dynamic operating environment. In order for the U.S. military to execute in this dynamic environment and retain competitive or comparative warfighting advantages, we must continue to invest in our people. As the chairman says, our people are our greatest competitive advantage. In regards to the enlisted force, no other nation in the world trains, educates, trusts, and empowers enlisted leaders like the U.S. military. Through Mission Command, enlisted leaders are able to use disciplined initiative within commander's intent, apply agile and adaptive thinking and methods to accomplish missions, and take care of the troops and their families. As the National Military Strategy says, people are the joint force's most valuable asset drawn from America's diverse citizenry. The complexity of the security environment is such that being effective tactically is not enough by itself, particularly for leaders. The projected demands of combat against a great power adversary requires leaders and subordinates to be able to operate above their assigned positions, which drives requirements for the continuing education and broadening experiences that will amplify their effectiveness both now and in positions of greater future responsibility. Therefore, we will continue to recruit, retain, and develop the best talent America has to offer in order to keep the United States military as the partner of choice globally. And with that, we'll take your questions. Christina, how are you?
Thank you so much. I'm great, thank you. Thank you for doing this. Wanted to ask each of the senior enlisted advisors here. I wanted an update on the fitness testing across the services and whether the top priorities. How do you get forces ready to fight and win today, to meet today's demands under the NDS, to meet to fight today's enemies, and how is that different from the past?
So, Sergeant Major Black, Troy, we'll go with you first.
Okay. I think time taught us a couple of lessons. One, how old people used to work out and how younger people today work out is different. Most of us laughing in the room know what I'm talking about, right? Fitness has changed everywhere. Professional sports tells us that sometimes how we did it isn't the best way to do it now. So bringing a lot of that science into the services, the Marine Corps in particular, looking at how we do our evaluations, what are the right exercises, what's the right nutrition plans to coincide with those exercises and training plans, is kind of what we're looking at. You may be familiar with, we started the Force Fitness Instructor Program a couple of years ago. So we have individuals in the Marine Corps specifically trained to enhance fitness, combat fitness.
Okay, and then in order for us to get, I'm going to ask the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force to comment, and then we'll move on to another question. Okay.
So on the surface, we have about 98% of our airmen across the Air Force that have a passing PT test. So overall fitness is going well. We've considered some changes to our fitness program, but one of the areas where we try to focus the most is really in nutrition, with some of the healthy eating options that we've implemented at many of our bases, and making sure that our airmen are fueled with the right thing. Looking at fitness from an overall perspective, not just the physical part, but the emotional, the total wellness, from a total wellness perspective. So we do have some challenges in our fitness programs that we continue to work on, but overall, I'd say we're doing pretty good in the physical fitness area.
And just to end that out, from a joint force perspective, I think the three things that have to be synchronized is, how are we training, how are we preparing, how are we executing, and how are we rehabilitating or recovering from training, how are we fueling. And then there's got to be, from a healthcare perspective, it's got to be about optimal human performance for the demands now and in the future on the joint force. Okay, Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. Question for the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. Recently, a Coast Guardsman leapt onto a narco sub, banged on the hatch until they opened up, and then arrested the crew. Is that Coast Guardman up for any Valor Awards?
So we will definitely recognize that person. That was a tremendous feat of bravery, and we're very proud of that. We actually have folks that do that from time to time. Those subs are not common, but they're not uncommon either. We do that. So that one just happened to get captured on video, but we have folks that are stopping those drug boats a couple times a week.
Okay, thank you. And a quick question for the Command Sergeant Major of the National Guard. I noticed, I think you're wearing a 28th Infantry Division pin.
That's correct.
Do you think the division got enough credit for delaying the Battle of the Bulge, delaying the German offensive, to allowing the 101st to go in the Bastogne?
Absolutely not. No, it's funny when you look back on history, and I've actually had a chance to visit, and be at the Call Trail there. As well, and really that was a total Army, both Army National Guard and active duty forces were there. It was a heck of a fight, but I'm a little bit parochial. Spending 27 years in the 28th Infantry Division, we can always use more credit. Oh.
Okay, Barbara, yes ma'am.
First of all, thank you, gentlemen, all for doing this in front of TV cameras. Being able to ask about the Battle of the Bulge is exactly why we want access to military leaders. And I mean that seriously. But let me turn to kind of maybe something a little more somber. Sergeant Major Troxell, I'd like to ask you and any of the other gentlemen here. So it's more about your view of sort of the cultural, societal health of the troops in today's environment. So what have we seen? We've seen a steady stream, small, but still, of troops being found to be members of white supremacist groups. And you deal with these cases when you find them, but they are there. That's a fact. You have women of color being called out publicly in this country, whatever reasons, they just are. You have partisan political statements being made in front of the troops who are not supposed to be and are not allowed to be part of partisan politics in their professional military lives. So I'd like to ask you, gentlemen, how you view this. How do you now deal with this cultural, societal environment your young troops find themselves in? You can't, my suspicion is you're not staying silent about it within the ranks. How are senior enlisted people dealing with this?
Okay, I'll answer, and then I'll ask the MCPON for his comments on this. So first of all, one of the things that makes our military great is that we remain apolitical and we don't get involved in politics. Second of all, when you look at the demands on the Joint Force right now, and in terms of what I spoke about earlier, all the forces around the world, and some of the things we're trying to do in terms of deterrence, and in terms of still getting after violent extremists and things like that, the troops at the lower level are more focused on being prepared to go and do the mission that they signed up for. And I will tell you that in terms of some of these things that we will not tolerate, like racism and these organizations that support that and everything, that's not tolerated because of engaged leaders that are out there every day in their troops' lives and are with them, and they're sharing in the same kind of hardships with them and everything, and they educate them and build them so that they understand that they're part of this organization that doesn't tolerate these kind of things. And Mick Vaughn, I'll ask you to.
The true strength of our organization is our diversity and the different places and experiences we've had that help us bring different perspectives to the fight. We know that. We are a reflection of the society we draw on, but all of us have different but very similar enculturation processes where we bring people in and expose them to our core values and let them know what our norms are. And we spend a lot of time reinforcing character and leader development throughout the course of a career. That puts us in a very good place. And frankly, I spend about 270, 280 days a year traveling around our Navy all over the world. And you're not going to find a group of people that is more ready and more prepared to fight because they understand and they know they can rely on their teammates.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to.
I would just say that, there are lots of people in this world, whether in politics or wherever, that may not emulate the things that we would want our service members to emulate. But there are tons of role models within our services. A bunch of them sitting right over here to our right. So our airmen in our particular case have a lot of people that they can look up to that do display the right types of behavior, the behavior that we want them to display. And like Russ said, centered around our core values. So each of the services, as you know, has core values that we.
So Sergeant Major Troxell, can you ever envision a day when there will be a female senior enlisted advisor? And why hasn't there been? At the very top levels of what you gentlemen do.
So, ma'am, it is one of the things that's on my mind all the time. As the MCPON said, we focus on diversity. And if you look at the Office of the Senior Enlisted Advisor, the chairman now, I have racial diversity and I have gender diversity. But there's one standard. So tomorrow morning, when Christina, you come to watch PT, you're going to see Team SEAC out there executing the same tasks, regardless of their gender or who they are. So it's one of the things I work on a lot. Okay.
There would be nothing professionally that would prevent.
No, there's nothing professionally that prevents that. I'm not going to speculate on why, that it hasn't happened, but this is something that's on my mind all the time, because if you look at the DCELC right now, we're 22 old guys sitting around, and I want to continue to push so that, we have a greater diversity as far as gender within the DCELC. But it's something I continue to work on, and I will go around to combat support agencies, which 3-star level commands that have female senior enlisted leaders, and these guys do the same thing, and we talk about what are your goals, what do you hope to achieve, we want to help you. Now, we're not, going to do anything to just have a snapshot of, wow, look, we got a female on the DCEL, but we want to get after why is it not happening more often, And that's something that the services are getting after. And in terms of my Command Senior Enlisted Leader Management Office, it's something we constantly look at as we move forward here. But it's tough. Go ahead.
Ma'am, there has been, Chief Master Sergeant Denise Jelinski Hall was in my position either 2 or 3 positions ago. So in the National Guard, we have at the Defense Senior Enlisted Leader level had female on that and achieved that rank.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sir.
Hi, Scott Massioni with Federal News Network. I know that daycare is something that you guys keep a close eye on. Do you have any updated numbers and maybe just a general idea of how daycare has been going on installations at this point, considering the lack of daycare accessible to service members, and also anything you may need from Congress in the future or from the Defense Department to better this situation?
Yeah. So Russ, I'll go to you. On
Sure.
this.
No, so Navy's in a real predicament because we account for about 54% of the DoD overall DoD shortfall, simply because of the places we exist. Hawaii, Norfolk, San Diego are some of the hardest. Daycare is not a Navy issue; it's a nationwide issue. And so when it's a problem and we can't, provide subsidies, in meaningful numbers and send people out into town because the market's already saturated, we have a problem we can't very easily solve. It's something that our CNO has paid so much attention to, and our Installations Command, Admiral Jackson, has been tirelessly working at. We have a plan to build out about 1,000 beds, but at 8,500 short, we know that we need a lot more than that, and especially as our Navy continues to grow, the need will continue to grow. We're looking into some creative ideas, partnerships with organizations that have space, because space is really the thing that we need, and figuring out how maybe we can leverage that with some of our workers and money to make it work, but it's still in the developmental phase. But we know, for us, especially in the Navy, it's a critical force enabler that we have to continue to press on. And Congress has been great. Everyone has heard us to a person and said, both sides of the aisle, and have said, we really want to help you with this. And they've offered all sorts of creative support.
So in the Air Force, it varies. Some places there's not enough capacity for the children. In some places there's plenty of capacity, but we can't keep staff. So we've tried to tackle that both ways. The places where we don't have capacity, we can't always just build another child development center. So we've partnered with some of the off-base facilities and making sure that they get the accreditation that's up to standard for our military folks. Providing both them and the military member incentives to, when feasible, use some of the off-base options for child care. And then we've tried to increase the pay and opportunities for our folks who work in the child development centers. And so I think attacking both of those will help. We've also increased some of the deployment incentives, so when members deploy, having free child care for their spouses and children that are left back home.
And we'll finish that one off with the MCPOG here.
So I want to publicly thank the Navy. The Coast Guard has partnered with the Navy, and we're increasing our subsidies. So where we can't build daycares, what we can do is we can apply subsidies to our members and give them opportunities to get daycare in the civilian world. Sometimes that helps spouses because they don't have to drive all the way to the base to drop their kids off. And the Navy's worked with the Coast Guard quite a bit to help us deliver the subsidies. We are starting to work. We used an outside office to deliver those subsidies, but the Navy's taken that on organically, and they're saving the Coast Guard over $1 million a year by helping us deliver those subsidies organic through the Navy. And I want to publicly also thank the Congress for giving the Coast Guard $2 million for extra subsidies for high-cost areas. So where we can't build daycares and we can't increase the capacity of daycares, we can give our members subsidies to help defray the cost of daycare.
Okay, yes, sir.
I'm here from the Middle East News Agency of Egypt. What's the next phase or the prospects of dealing with the problem of Iran and North Korea in terms of the new images saying something about the submarine and something about Korea?
So our job is to make sure that the men and women of today's military are prepared to do the things I spoke, to fight and win. So that means physically, mentally, emotionally, technically, and tactically. And that's what our focus is as senior enlisted leaders. And so regardless of where the effort is, and in terms of what we're doing, deter, compete, respond, or whatever, our job is to make sure that we get after the health and wellness and readiness of the troops and families so they're prepared for whatever we have to do, whether it's phase 1 or phase 5 of operations, to get after the mission that we're asked to do. So that's what all of us here focus on, regardless of what the threat is.
I'll
get you next, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir, you.
All right. Richard says from military.com. The new secretary, when he was Army secretary, made one of his priorities fixing up military housing. And at his hearing last week, his confirmation hearing, he suggested, indicated strongly that this was going to be one of his priorities across the board, all the services. And so he said, he sort of indicated again a little bit more this morning. So question to you is, where do we stand with military housing now? What is the status? What's being done? We hear all kinds of reports of tremendous backlogs and work orders and things
so
like
I'll
that.
ask Troy, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, to speak on behalf of the Marine Corps.
First of all, I'd say that for the Marine Corps, we're getting our leadership more heavily engaged in the housing process, both how Marines are assigned to their housing, the maintenance issues that are within the housing, and really trying to keep up with what's going on so that the Marine is represented by their command or their leadership in the housing assignment process and the maintenance. That's one of the things we found to be most challenging is how we deal with the maintenance issues. And that's where most of our inadequacy comes from, is if a house or a Marine has a problem in their home, the time of getting it fixed, what's the impacts to the quality of life of the family, how does that impact their quality of life as a Marine, how does it make them more ready to be a war fighter? Those things are all integral to our families. So getting our leadership engaged is our number one focus right now.
And Russ?
Very similar to the Marine Corps, we've also taken a round turn on some maybe misunderstanding of the PPV contracting process and whether, how involved leaders could be, and our leadership is getting more intimately engaged at the unit level to ensure that sailors are getting the advocacy that they need to get things fixed in housing.
What are the misunderstandings about the
All PPV
about the
contracting was written in a way that implied that it was a contract between the member and the company, and that the chain of command, where base housing, there was an implied understanding you could be involved with PPV housing. There was a bit of a misunderstanding that we were not to be involved, and we can never divest ourselves of leadership opportunities. So we got back involved as the CNO and I talked to our sailors about, and we're seeing a lot more responsiveness from housing offices. The PPV partners have been very willing to lean into this and look at the way they've written the contracts to ensure that they provide a better advantage to sailors. So we're doing a lot of things to ensure that the housing experience is one that's better and certainly more responsive to needs.
Go ahead, sir.
Richard actually pretty much took my question right out of there, but I guess I'll kind of follow up a little bit, if you don't mind. We saw just this week the Air Force withhold incentive fees to one of the one of the agencies that runs housing. If you guys could just kind of tell us, we're almost a year into when we first started seeing major reporting on this, and leadership kind of really cracking the whip on it. Where are you hearing from? Really from it's mostly enlisted folks. I imagine you guys, several of you guys have lived in these housing.
Yeah.
What are you hearing from your guys as to where they stand? Have things improved?
So things have improved. Typically, when I go out and visit a base, that's one of the stops that I'll make is into the houses, and sometimes it's both enlisted and officer housing. And what the response that we get typically is that the response time from the housing maintenance and the privatized owners has changed. So before, it would take them a long time to get a response, to get things fixed, and now that all of this has been brought to light, the relationship between the member and the housing office has improved. So still some challenges, like you said, with some of our companies. This has shined the light on some practices that were not above board, and that company is being held accountable. But like I think Troy or maybe Russ mentioned, we've made sure that all of the commanders at the local level understand their responsibility in helping the members out, as well as holding the housing the owners accountable for the things that need to be done for the members.
Yes, sir.
Hey, good afternoon, sir. In regards to military recruiting, what tools are being used to entice young people to get into the service? And have you seen an aversion amongst young people either politically motivated, they don't want to associate with the military, they have the wrong idea, or financially motivated because there's better opportunities out in the private sector. What are you all doing to get young people right away?
Secretary Mattis, when he was the Secretary of Defense, asked me to go out and look at all the recruiting commands. I'll answer your question, and I'll ask my colleagues here to pitch in. And he wanted to see how we were doing in terms of prospecting as opposed to processing, meaning how well were we going out into the areas where we could recruit or where there wasn't a big military presence, and going out and getting after looking for this talent. You know, back when the economy wasn't so good, there was people walking through the door, so it was pretty easy to bring in talent. But now, as you suggest, the economy getting better and other opportunities outside the military. And then one of the big things is, if 1% of our force is serving right now and has served, I've been in the Army for 37 years now, and for about the last 20 years, about 1% of the force has served. Who are the influencers onto the young men and women now? It's not so much the parents, it's the grandparents, and more it's educators, it's coaches and people like that. So we have to continue to leverage out in our recruiting areas these people that may be outside the family that are influencers to help us look for the talent that we need for this force here. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I just executed a visit to Navy Recruiting District Los Angeles last week, and Los Angeles has not got a heavy military population. It's San Diego to the south, certainly, and bases nearby, but not in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is not just one of our most productive districts; it's the most productive. In visiting with them and talking to them, I talked to a group of recruits. And I said, how many of you come from military bloodlines? Mother, father, sister, brother, cousin. About 3 out of 15 hands went up. And that's not our population. Most of us come from some sort of military bloodline. So what it tells me is when potential recruits see opportunity, they're willing to seize it. And what we have to do is make them understand the value of service and what it is the military can provide. For 4 years or 40, there's something to be gained here, and when they're seeing it, they're moving towards it. And we're not having. I mean, recruiting is never easy. You know that the unemployment in the demographic that we're all after is at a 50-year low. It's not easy, but we have to advertise who we are, what we stand for, and what it is that you can come away with. And I think it almost sells itself.
Sorry, Major Troy.
In my last assignment, Marine Corps Recruiting Command kind of was closely associated with Manpower Reserve Affairs. And I'll tell you, from Marine Corps recruiting, we tend to do pretty good at meeting our retention or our session goals. Number one reason is branding. I think the specific identity of each service, and I won't speak for everyone, but that's why individuals join that service. They join for a reason. It's the brand that the service has. That's the number one thing about getting into the population. The other thing is, I think we're taking a harder look at who we are recruiting. Right now, it's a case of massive numbers to attrit to a certain number to meet the basic training standards to get to their follow-on schools. Maybe we don't have to go after so many individuals to try to find that right pool. So there's a lot of initiatives going on in the Marine Corps. Use of the TAPIS test, using some artificial intelligence, going after some of the other tests that we're doing right now, looking at the ASVAB and trying to see if we can't sort of adjust that really almost 70-year-old testing process and try to bring it up to date so we actually go after the populations of the individuals we're trying to recruit now. Lastly, I would say that our recruiters do a really good job. And if I could give a hand clap right now to probably anybody in the Marine Corps, it's the recruiters that are out there on the street every day, all across America and some of our territories overseas. They're doing a great job to try to find those very high-quality individuals to enter service to serve our nation.
The Coast Guard's doing good with recruiting. We're going for we're trying to get a diversity inclusion. We're trying to recruit a diverse population and make sure that we're tapping into all the recruitable folks. We have a small number of recruiters, but we have a pretty good amount of people that want to join the Coast Guard.
Hold on. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, Brian Emerson with Air Force Magazine. In Washington lately, it kind of seems like the war in Afghanistan has really been put on the back burner or largely forgotten to the point where the Secretary's hearing didn't have a question about it. Those of you who have visited downrange, is that a concern that's shared by those who are out fighting right now, and are they getting what they need to succeed?
So, if you're here for the next press conference, we will have the U.S. Forces Afghanistan senior enlisted leader here with us. But having visited there 7 times in the last 3.5 years, the troops over there are still executing the mission that they've been given, and it's not only through our special operations forces at defeating ISIS and everything, but it's building partner capacity into the Afghan security forces. So I wouldn't say it's on the back burner right now, but I would ask you, when we have the COCOM guys up here and we got the Afghanistan guy up here, ask him, because he's the guy living it every day. Okay. Sir, go ahead.
I want to ask you about influencers. You've been in the service 37 years. To what extent has the Iraq War and its tainted origins and its uncertain and tainted results influenced the influencers to say to their children, don't go into the military, you'll end up in a place like Iraq where we went in for no good reason and we're still there?
So I think the threat of combat or the threat of injury or death is always a concern. But I think men and women that choose to serve, it's because they look and see the great work that the men and women are doing serving in the military. I will tell you, I'm not a Coast Guard groupie, but he is a good friend of mine. But when that Coastie on top of that submarine was executing his mission in a dynamic fashion like that, there are going to be young men and women out there that say, I want to do that. Or when they see sailors that are doing freedom of navigation operations in some of the most contested seas around the world, and they're hearing about this, they look at us as a world-class organization, and they want to be a part of that. So I think the ability, and I'll ask my colleagues to answer, the young men and women who are trying to reach something that they haven't been able to attain on the outside, their untapped potential, or to be something bigger than themselves, I think they look at the people within the military and they see that and they say, that's what I want to be a part of. So, okay, I'll ask
about 65% of the Air Force anyway joined the Air Force after 9/11, and so they have known nothing but war their entire careers, and they joined because they have a desire to serve. And I don't doubt that there are some airmen, some service members who, from a maybe political standpoint, have that mindset of why we're here, why we shouldn't be here. But I would say the great majority of our airmen and our service members, I think I can speak for the rest of my teammates, they enjoy serving, and again, they joined the Air Force and they joined the military during a time of war because, again, they wanted to contribute to the defense of this nation.
So let's get a National Guard perspective on this, both Air and Army.
Sure. I will tell you that the biggest question I get from our young men and women today is not, oh my gosh, will I have to go downrange? It's deployments aren't going to stop, are they, Sergeant Major? Our young men and women, they join to serve, and they join to do their job downrange, whether it be an infantryman or a refueler. That's the biggest concern that I hear from our young men and women today, sir, that they won't be able to deploy, that there won't be any deployments for them into the future. Single biggest across the 54.
So I think the risk of injury and death in combat is something that is around us all the time. Whenever a young man or woman deploys anywhere, whether it's to do an exercise or whether it's to go into combat, the common phrase by the family is be safe, because the family knows the inherent risks of being part of this warrior class known as the United States military. And we all that join, from the youngest troop to me and these guys here, understand that risk, and we accept it because we're part of this world-class organization. We've been trained right, we've been educated right, we can be trusted, and we can be empowered to defend our homeland. And every young man and woman that I run into, and I go all over the world as well, they want to go to the places that we've been going to in the past years, like Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and places like that. So even though there's that inherent risk all the time, I think it's accepted amongst the force. And I'll ask you, Troy, to...
That's why we all join. I mean, at the end of the day, you pick your service, but you know, if I join Marine Corps to go deploy, to go to combat if called to do so, Marine Corps might be a little unique in that about 75% of our FTAP Marines, our first-term Marines, our first contract, they get out. We can only keep 25%. And people still want to join the Marine Corps. So I don't think there's any sort of legacy concern over what's happened in the past, whether they're going to serve, whether we're going to have an opportunity to go someplace and serve where there's danger, where that's just part of it. People want to come serve in the military. They want to come serve their country. And that the rest of the risk of it is just part of the deal.
Thank you.
Okay, man.
Hi, Oriana Pollock with military.com. I want to take the conversation back to PT for 1 second. I know each of you has revamped your PT tests over the last 5-10 years, and now you're really focused on not just having an airman, sailor, Marine pass the PT test, but also to have a healthy lifestyle. I know some of you have even incorporated sports medicine into how you train with your airmen, for example. But how are, and we saw the NBC News report this week of overheating as being a new unforeseen challenge for people who are pushing themselves, especially doing PT, especially going out there on rucks and challenges like this. So how are each of you in your services dissecting, while trying to push your service members to be the most healthy, the most fit, but how are each of you taking into consideration these unforeseen challenges such as overheating and climate change, which was not before?
So I'll answer first and then I'll ask my colleague. So an inherent task of a leader at any level, whether tactical, operational, strategic, is to look out for the welfare of their men and women. So looking for signs of overheating, frostbite, and all of these other things are inherent tasks that our leaders should be getting after. Okay? The other thing is, in order for us to be the most effective we can be, in order to win, fight and win, especially against a near-peer threat, we have to have a high-performing force in terms of their individual performance. So that means we got to train them right, we got to PT them right, we got to fuel them right, and then we got to give them tools to be able to recover and rehabilitate so they can continue to do it day after day after day. And then we have to make sure that we're doing things like fighter management, meaning that we're looking at troops, and if they're being challenged either mentally or emotionally, that engaged leaders can pick up on these nonverbal kind of cues and get the person the help they need, not to remove them from the formation, but keep them on the track of being a high-performing individual for the organization. So this is just the nature of what we need to do to move forward. And as Sergeant Major Black mentioned, the way I trained in 1982 when I was a young private is not the way that we train today. We are so much more dynamic, as you suggest, and it's made us a much more effective force.
So we already know how to do this. So there are a lot of areas where we have precautions for heat, and so you can't perform PT testing or PT period before certain times. There are a lot of places where it's extremely cold, and we have restrictions on when you can test. There's places where it's too windy. Now, I think you referred to global warming and maybe some additional places, and I think that's the responsibility. All leaders at the lowest level of squadrons for the Air Force are empowered to be able to make those decisions on when folks should be out, whether it's exercising PT and certainly taking their PT test, and we just try to continue to empower them. And then some of this is from a policy standpoint. We have to make sure that our policy is where it should be. Some of our airmen and maybe service members in general, they want to be good role models. They want to pass their fitness exams, and sometimes they go to extremes to make sure that they pass and become good role models, and so we have to look out for that as well.
Yeah, I was also going to say, I don't think these things are unforeseen. I think as we have more people moving towards a true fitness culture and wanting to achieve things in the physical realm, you see more and more of us getting out and doing things, and that's probably what you're seeing. One of the things along the lines of policy, like K-Wright said, is we use policy to incentivize, because we know that sailors will rise to the challenge if given a challenge. We said if you score an excellent or outstanding, you can skip the next PT test. You have to do the BCA, but you can skip the next test. And when we did that, 10% moved into the excellent or outstanding category. Next cycle, 10% more moved into the excellent or outstanding category. So in doing so, and giving them a reason to try, because it's a wellness check. It's not a combat fitness test for us in the Navy. So by providing some incentive, it drove sailors towards an even more healthy and achieving lifestyle.
So if I could finish off on that, we fully understand that we may have to fight in extreme cold and extreme heat conditions. So we have to train for that. So that means the art of leadership is even more important, and we have to have a balance as leaders in terms of discipline and compassion on how we get after business. And so we have to continue to invest in leaders so that they're more empowered and they understand more the men and women that they have the responsibility to take care of. And there has to be that balance. And when one of those is out of balance, then the heat injuries come in, or the cold weather injuries come in, or other things adverse can come in. So, okay, ma'am.
Hi, Amanda from CNBC. So I have a finance question. The 1.3 trillion budget deal that was announced on Monday puts the Pentagon share at 738 billion. And given that you all have to invest and equip your soldiers across the services, and given the threat climate that you laid out in your opening statement, is that enough, the 738 billion?
So we are moving in the right direction here in terms of investing in the force. And I will tell you, with the money the precious money that Congress gives us, we have to be good stewards with it. So in any endeavor that we have to make sure that we're staying on the cutting edge of technology to make sure that we can see our threats first, we can understand those threats first, we can act on those threats first, and then we can finish decisively. And that may be in individual equipment, it may be in the equipment that is a squad equipment or whatever, and things like that. So with the money that we are given, we have to continue to be good stewards of that money and invest in it properly. And I'll turn to, go ahead.
I just asked for one more thing, and that's that, that the Hill has worked with us very well to pass a budget the last couple of years, and that consistent, steady funding and ensuring that we don't enter a CR environment is essential to our health and well-being, because that enables us to do things, start new programs and other things. So
it's what we have. And I think all of us would willingly admit that when we do our budgeting and when we advise our bosses, we all end up with a pretty long unfunded requirements list. So I think it's important for us to continue to prioritize between what we need to sustain us today and what we need to do in the future in terms of investments, research, and development. And I have full confidence in our team, our comptroller team, and budgeting, full budgeting team to utilize the budget that we get in the Air Force.
Okay, one last question. Ryan, you got it.
Thank you, Sergeant. Actually, I wanted to follow up on that. Given that the Coast Guard situation, you guys actually suffered through the shutdown on that. Can you talk about what the impact of that was on morale? How that we heard a lot of the Commandant was actually very outspoken about it at the time, which was kind of unusual. Can you talk a little bit what that was like?
Before he goes into that, Ryan, can I tell you how sensitive I was to the Coast Guard not getting paid? That my wife Sandra and Jason and his wife Amy went out to eat, and I picked up the tab because he wasn't getting paid. Okay?
There was quite a bit of the government that wasn't funded during the lapse in appropriation, and that was unfortunate. But the communities that the Coast Guard serves in rallied around our folks, and I think we turned what was a challenge into a real, positive. I can't thank all the communities, all the folks that turned out to help us enough, and even though we had a lapse in appropriation, people were dropping things off to us that the community was turning out for us. We were showing up to restaurants. This guy was picking up my chow, and we really got a lot of support, and I think it showed our Coasties how much they were really loved and appreciated by those that they serve. So it was disappointing, but it wasn't just the Coast Guard. I have to say that it was a lot of people. People join the Coast Guard because they want to serve in the armed forces, and when there's something that kind of says, hey, you're not getting paid like the rest of the armed forces, it was a little disappointing to our folks, and Now, obviously, you know, when you're not, when you, and we were, our paycheck was delayed by about a week, and you know, that is a little frustrating, and that uncertainty that came with it's a little disappointing. I think our recruiting took a little bit of a hit for a little bit, and then you know, maybe somebody that was going to re-enlist right during that time may have thought twice about it, but by and large, I think we've recovered pretty well. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all. I would ask you please stick around for this next group. All of these high-speed individuals over here. So we talk about the operational environment and all the great things that the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, coasties from all components, active guard and reserve, are doing out in the operational environment. So thank you very much for your time today. Sir, I think we'll just reset this and then we'll come on back in. Okay.